Order! Order! With order!
If the reports are to be believed, 330,000 people are excess deaths under austerity. Do you know that's more people that were killed in Idi Amin's purges? That's the context of how much damage the Conservative government did in 2010 to 2015.
Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. Today I'm joined by one of my favourite YouTubers at the moment, No Justice, or NJ for short. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, I'm not doing too well. So, not doing too well. I'm doing great. Aside from the wind today, it's fucking windy today. I hate it.
Windy outside, really warm indoors. It's a real weird day for weather.
Yeah, it's wear it in the morning, regret it in the afternoon weather for sure.
Absolutely.
And like having curly hair as well, it hasn't been great for me. I've had an epic back comb all day. Look like my mother from the 80s. No, so let's sort of get into it. We're here to talk about the economy and the state of British politics. So
it is quite a state, isn't it?
Bit of a state. So what kind of state would you compare it to?
I mean, there was a funny what Mark Carney talked about in the wake of like the Liz Truss experiment.
Yeah.
Mark Carney compared it to Argentina, like Argentina on the channel, and that seems like a reasonable summation of the position that we're in.
And for the listeners who aren't too sure what he meant by that, could you kind of go into that and explain
there's
it?
been plenty of periods in Argentinian economic history where things have gone a little tits up. And so I think that's a reasonable comparison. Because he was juxtaposing it between this kind of the Tufton Street desire to turn it into Singapore, the city of London especially, into Singapore on Thames, their kind of free market paradise. And that went well. That went really well.
And actually, it was just the other day that Liz Truss sort of gave her sort of 2 pence, or I suppose that probably used to be about £200 before she sort of weighed in on it. She gave her 2 pence on the state of the UK economy and what she thought that we should be doing. What did you make of that?
I mean, it's incredible the level to which politicians in this country, given the backgrounds that they're from and the people that they hang out with, the ways in which that they are so detached from reality of everyday people in this country, that Liz Truss can do what she's done, can be responsible for so much economic hardship for so many people, and to have zero contrition about anything that she's done, and to still be here trying to claim how she was the one who was wronged, as if there's some kind of conspiracy against her, rather than it just being the economic reality that she had to get shown.
Well, it was the blob, wasn't it? It was this left-wing blob consisting of the IMF, the World Bank,
the Bank of England.
Yeah, Bank of England, the Treasury, I believe as well. These famous left-wing institutions, all conspiring to bring her down, and yet she's still sort of. I mean, it's like, how long is she in charge? 44 days. 44 days. Like I remember doing a video about things that have lasted longer than Liz Truss, and one of them being that lettuce. It's like this weird sort of fever dream, where like you kind of forget. Like it feels to me is like when someone says to me, "Do you remember when like so and so used to play for this football club?" And I go, "Did they?" And then I go on Wikipedia and I'm like, "Oh, they did. They were there." It was so obviously with the states of our economy. How would you manage it? What would you bring in? What would you change?
I mean, I think we need to have a complete revamping of the way we stratify our economy. Now, I am a socialist personally, in my own personal politics, but I understand that we're not going to have some kind of Bolshevik revolution anytime soon. Not that I would want one anyway. So we need to have real, sensible ways, common sense ways. I hate that phrase, but ways of changing the way our economy works in general for working people. I think you look at things like the Nordic model, that would be the kind of economic model that I would want to kind of move towards, in that I think we need more social ownership of capital, we need higher wages, we need a lower gap between the pay for the most well off in our society and the people at the bottom, because inequality has gotten far too bad in our society, despite the fact, right? One of the things that Liz Truss talked about a lot was this idea of needing to grow the economy. And the economy has grown. In the last 13 years, we have had consistent economic growth. We've not had a recession in that time. Not a huge amount of growth. It's only been between 1% and 2% for most of that time, but it has at least been some level of economic growth. Yet people's wages, working people's wages in this country, are worse than what they were in 2010. The standard of living is worse than what it was in 2010. This idea that growth in as of itself is some kind of economic panacea is just not borne out by the data, because it's not translated into working people's wages, it's not translated into a higher standard of living for everybody. All that it's led to is a concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer people's hands. So we need to really change the way we think about how we set wages, right? The minimum wage, great legislation. I'm not saying that it's terrible legislation, but you look at the Nordic countries, like I was mentioning before, their version of wage setting isn't to do with the government trying to ensure that there is a minimum level of wage wage for everybody. The trade unions will have, the union density is so much higher. It's 90% in some Nordic countries, where trade unions across whole sectors will negotiate with a consortium of employers about what they believe the minimum wage should be for their sector. And a result of that way of wage setting, wages are higher, CEO pay is lower, and the economy is stronger, right? You think, well, we need to grow our economy so there's more tax receipts to pay for public services. That's the Rachel Reeves line on this one. We'd have more tax receipts if more money was going to working people, because working people pay more in taxes than investors, than people who make money by capital gains. That the fact that Labour have gone away from taxing wealth to make things fairer, from taxing capital gains, which currently is taxed at half the rate of wages, right? If you want to earn money, be productive during a productivity crisis, we disincentivise that by taxing you way, way more than we would tax you if you were trading stocks or buying and selling property or being a landlord, for example. They still get tax credits on the mortgages that they pay for from their rental receipts.
I'm hearing this word a lot, the G word, growth. It's like we're going to grow our economy, we've got to grow the sector. And that's a word that's being said a lot by the Labour Party, at the moment. Now, for those of you who are listening, you might be aware that NJ had a bit of a run-in with Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. Could you talk to us about that?
So, the journalists in this country, there's a lot of backstory to this, in that because of Labour's shift, we've all seen their shift in policy framework from where they were in 2017 and 2019, notwithstanding Keir Starmer's promise to be, managerial Corbynism, to take the 2017 manifesto as a foundational document, so to speak. They really retreated from those positions. And because, of course, the media and the political class in this country have a vested interest into ensuring that there is hegemonic economic beliefs between the two mainstream parties to ensure that continuity, they've not been critical of any right-wing shift of the Labour Party. And if they have been, it's only been in passing. So it's fallen down to me. I have had to be the one who's had to criticise Labour from the left directly to their faces. Now, when I say that, what I mean is that LBC, every month or so, they'll have Rachel Reeves come in their Ring Rachel segment, where members of the public can call in like they always do with LBC, speak directly to the Shadow Chancellor, ask her questions, and try and scrutinise her on policy. And since the journalists aren't scrutinising her, I decided that I would do it. So I called into LBC and I quoted a prominent economist, in my words, claiming that we need higher taxes on banks and higher taxes on higher earners to ensure that inequality doesn't rise in this country and to ensure there's money for public services. And of course, she responded by saying, well, actually, I think we need to reduce inequality, get more funding through economic growth. And turns out, as it transpired, the quote that I had picked was a quote from Rachel Reeves. So Ian Dale then relayed that to her. And you can see her getting stumped by it because she's not had to deal with this level of direct criticism over her political retreat, her ideological retreat over the last 2 years, 3 years since she was appointed Shadow Chancellor after Annalise Dodds was.
Because I feel like with Labour, and I say this as a member of the party, the scrutiny that's been directed is mainly sort of revolved around trans rights, immigration, particularly with small boats crossings. Those seem to be the only two issues that the right-wing media and sort of the Conservatives really seem to care about. The economy is kind of like, it's like the thing I always hear is, well, it's going to be in a shit state, or not something, obviously not along sort of using that particular language, but along the lines of it's not going to be in a great way, and we just need to work with what we've got, and we can't commit to making certain promises because if we do, and then it's actually in a bad state, then we're going to look like we've fallen back on our promises or we're shirking our responsibilities. What do you make of that?
I mean, the reason why the right-wing media are only attacking on those issues is because they know that they have no material interest in making Labour look less right-wing than their current policy platform is on the economy. Because it is right-wing. Talking about growth rather than redistribution is a right-wing position. It's a Thatcherite position. I've made plenty of comparisons between Liz Truss and Rachel Reeves on their rhetoric. Policies may not be the same, but the rhetoric is the same. And it's neoliberal Thatcherite rhetoric about where we get growth from, who the growth goes to, and what the key issues are in our economy. Now, but of course, the right-wing media, they don't care. If Labour are right-wing, that suits them fine. But what they want to do is they want to stop Labour at all costs, regardless if they're the Daily Mail-type papers. But if they're the more kind of centrist or centre-right papers, they are happy to see the economic stuff, but they want to shift Labour's position on things like trans rights, for example. Not just because it's red meat for a very irritating section of the public who seem to be obsessed with trans people. I don't talk about it on stream because I just don't want to have to deal with the deluge of comments that you get in response. But of course, they know that if they bang on about it enough, Labour will change their policy platform. And as we've seen from the recent announcement from Annalise Dodds, who is now the current Shadow Equalities Minister, they've retreated from a bunch of positions on trans rights that they previously had because of the sustained media attack and it becoming part of the cultural zeitgeist. Actually, earlier on today, before we started filming, we were talking about the culture war over motorists in ULEZ. Not going to go too far into it, but the ULEZ is not a huge issue for Londoners. It's really not a huge issue. The Telegraph blew this up out of proportion with their front page with a 20, 30 person protest that wasn't indicative of the overall view of ULEZ in London. But the papers want to create a narrative. They want to create a narrative where the Labour Party are seen as being the enemy of some certain section of society, in this case motorists, for pretty normal and sensible policy as far as I'm concerned about things like emissions and things like speed limits. And the papers are really, really good at setting those narratives, and that's why I think alternative media is really important, not just to push back on the narrative from the media, but to also hold politicians and political parties to account for any other failures on policy outside of the purview of what the papers and the journalism sphere really cares about in this country.
So, kind of mentioning a lot of the sort of, what we've been talking about, there seems to be a lot of like this sort of angst towards liberals and this sort of this, not I'm going to say contempt, but sort of distrust and dislike. You don't like liberals.
No, I do not like liberals.
Can you explain why you don't like liberals?
So I am an open and unapologetic Marxist. So my philosophy, is based upon materialist philosophy, right? What is going on in the kind of material, where the material impact of things upon people. And that's where I critique policy from, the material impact of the policy as it's concerned. And when it comes to liberals, I feel like for a lot of these people, they are Fukuyamists. If your audience aren't aware, Francis Fukuyama was the one who coined the phrase the end of history, the idea that liberal capitalism is the best system and nothing can change that given the end of the Cold War. And a lot of liberals, I think, have internalized that rhetoric to the point at which they feel like they are no longer the ideological ones. Even though liberalism is explicitly an ideology, they don't feel like they're ideological. They just feel like they are common sense. They are the centre ground. They are the people who have the enlightened political opinions. And therefore, anyone who's outside of that purview can be... can be ignored within that context. So they do it to the right, they do it to the left. Not that I disagree with the right, but I think they should have a democratic voice in the same way that I think that I should be, even if I fundamentally disagree with the things that I believe. And because of this position where liberals don't think about ideology, they don't think that there's, what in my concern, the material impact of one set of ideologies versus the other, they will look at politicians, say from the Conservative Party, and they will give them credit for being good politicians or being good Tories or looking like...
I love that phrase, good Tories, because it's like, just look at their voting record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, if you didn't believe the deaths of 330,000 people, according to research, from austerity was a necessary evil as part of your governance, why did you stand for the Conservative Party in the first place? The material impact of what you did is what I'm going to judge you on. If you're a Theresa May figure or you're a Rory Stewart figure, sure, we may agree on some things. I might think that you might have good principles, but why would I put that in front of the material impact of the things that you believed in that led to the policies that caused so much pain to so many people? And liberals lap this stuff up. They look at Theresa May being the sensible politician in comparison to the very kind of unsensible Boris Johnson, and it becomes about vibes rather than about content. And especially since a lot of liberals are very kind of pro-EU, and obviously I voted Remain, I think we should have remained in the European Union, but a lot of liberals have made being in the European Union their entire political personality, and because Theresa May was very, very slightly less hard Brexit than Boris Johnson, not much Mayor, mind you, because the only real sticking point was Northern Ireland. There was no customs union, that was Ken Clarke and Jeremy Corbyn during the indicative votes. But because she has the right vibes, she looks sensible. David Cameron looked sensible to these people. He was the progressive conservative because he was the one who equalised gay marriage. But Liberals were so far removed from the political reality of conservative governance that they saw someone who looked professional. They saw their house prices increase because of low interest rates. Their mortgage stayed low, and they were never affected by austerity. So they didn't bother doing enough proper research on the impact of these policies, and they were too taken in by the well-presented tone of David Cameron that they gave him a majority. He was only in a coalition beforehand, and these same people then gave him a majority because Ed Miliband didn't have the right vibes. These are very frustrating people to deal with politically.
I can imagine, and I was probably part of them at one point, but I can allow myself because I was young. But I think, this phrase always comes up, like good Tory and whatnot. And the thing that I've noticed a lot recently is, you mentioned it with Rory Stewart and Theresa May. They're currently doing sort of press tours promoting various books that they've written, that it feels like they're trying to rewrite their role within the last 13 years of government. Why do you think that they are doing this? And also, why are people allowing them to do it?
I think they're specifically doing it because they know that the Conservative Party is completely screwed. They're done. It's over. It's completely over at this point. There is so much talk about what the Conservative Party are going to do towards the next election. Nothing. There's nothing that they can do. So you look at all the scores of MPs, right? New red wall MPs who gained their seat in 2019, who've had 4 years in government getting an MP salary and immediately are ditching it. They're rats leaving the sinking ship. They know it's completely over. There's no... According to conservative ideology, there's nothing that they can do to fix the problems of this country economically. The research shows that people in this country don't care about this kind of culture war slop that they're being fed at the time when bills are high. They can't afford to put, clothes on their kids' back, food on their kids' plates. And the Conservatives have no answer to this. So it's the ship is sinking incredibly quickly. And people who were previously a part of creating not just the electoral victory for these people, because Theresa May stood in the party, Rory Stewart stood in the party until the Brexit votes happened when he had the whip withdrawn. They know that they're complicit in this, so there has to be a personal way for them to completely wash their hands of the results of the last 13 years and try and rebrand themselves as being not like the populist conservative type party that they have at the moment. And they're being allowed to, because not just the people, the liberal types within the public, who I will always have, I'm a big believer in manufactured consent in this in politics in general, which, for your viewers who don't know, is a term coined by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman to describe the way in which there are unwritten rules about the kind of things that are allowed to be spoken about in political terms within the media, within political discussion, and those unwritten assumptions filter through to the public. So I'm not going to blame members of the public for being less than informed, or less informed than I would like them to be on certain issues. But the journalists know, the political and media class know that there is an audience for people to market themselves as being the quote-unquote good Tory. And so they're very, very happy to enable that. So that, if there is a future rebirth of the Conservative Party in a more centre-right form rather than the very right-wing type we've got at the moment, there's room for them to come back into that circle, having been rehabilitated despite their pretty appalling track record. I mean, I will give more props to Rory Stewart, as I think that he's come back and said he regrets the austerity period. But, Theresa May, not just the hostile environment stuff, which she's apologised for, like Windrush, it was under her leadership that our country resumed sales of arms for Saudi Arabia so that they could commit war crimes in Yemen. That was the Theresa May administration that did that. And for her to come here and saying, well, actually, I tried to stop Brexit, even though her Brexit deal didn't have any single market or customs union access, I feel like she's really pulling the wool over people's eyes here.
She should have listed, when she was asked what's the naughtiest thing she's ever done,
yeah,
she should have referenced selling weapons to the Saudis. I would say that. But I guess, it's kind of what I mentioned. I always hear this term of like, we want things to go back to normal. we want things to go back to the way that they used to be. And it's like, well, at what point are we saying things were normal? So if this kind of phrase kind of got coined around 2016, 2017 when Brexit was sort of going on.
Politics started.
And it's like when were things normal? We're going back to 2010, where between 2010 to 2013, we went from having 50 food banks in this country to 650 to now, I think, 1,400 in 2023. Are we talking about before when we had the financial crash and the various measures that would be introduced by New Labour? Again, hostile environment policies, similar as well. And
the
I guess,
Iraq War?
Yeah, the Iraq War. How could anyone forget that? Afghanistan, anything like that. It's, I guess, sort of talking about it, and it's like, well, when were things normal? And even afterwards, like, is there going to be an era of normality? Because I feel like the Conservatives will shift even further, right? And sort of rebrand themselves. I feel like Suella Braverman will be the next leader of the Conservative Party. I'm willing to put a tenner on that. Who do you think will be the next leader?
I have no idea. If they're sensible, it'll be Penny Mordaunt. She's the only one who performs well on camera. Yeah,
but see, Penny Mordaunt, she's one. I can only really explain it in football terms, right? Penny Mordaunt is like, imagine the Conservative Party is a struggling team, okay? They're not performing well on the pitch, but Penny Mordaunt is like the sub that comes on, and you go, oh, they were all right. Oh, they got a goal, or they got an assist. Yeah, they should start the next game. You start them, and then you realise they're just as crap as everybody else.
I mean, I definitely wouldn't put that past her. But returning to this point about, a bunch of the people who want to go back to normal, it's all, 2016 was when politics started. There's a meme on my channel. We always say that politics started in 2016 when these people realised Brexit happened. And politics was normal for them in 2015. Before, that's why they voted for David Cameron, as I mentioned before. So one of the things that really kind of radicalised me to more kind of left-wing politics, right? It's coming from somebody who lived in the home counties when I was growing up, and then went to university very far up north. Went to university in Lancaster. The place I moved to was in Manchester, and I worked in Salford, on Salford Precinct, the shopping centre around there, in the CEX. And it was the most kind of black-pilling moment for me. In that period of 2012 to 2015, when I was working, 2012 to 2016, I was working there. And people would come in, and CEX, it's an exchange shop for people who don't know, and they would come in to sell us their consumer electronics. And they would come to the till, and they would say, I need to sell my PlayStation, I need to sell my phone, I need to sell my PC, my laptop. And we tell them the, very low price, usually a third of what we sell it for, because it's got to include not just how much the markup is, but also how much stock doesn't get sold. And they would look at me, and then their face would drop, and then they said, because they know they're not getting very much money for it at all, and then they just say, yeah, take it, I can't afford not to sell it. Salford's a really deprived area of this country because, of course, it's one of the areas of this country that high levels of manufacturing before our economy became over-financialised under Thatcher, Major, Blair, Cameron. And it's never recovered. That area of this country has never recovered, I guess, slightly since Media City, but that's specifically Salford Keys rather than the other areas of Salford, like the Precinct, like Ordsall, which was where I was living when I was living in Salford. And from the kind of middle-class upbringing that I had to working a minimum wage job, living in a shared house and being around people who'd had their entire local economy gutted by 45 years of neoliberalism and centralisation inside London, this was the one thing that radicalised me. Like, people always say, this leftist politician, this leftist political figure turned me into like a socialist. And no, it was George Osborne. George Osborne was the one who did it. And the people who think politics started with Brexit, they never experienced that. They were living in, a relative normality for all of that David Cameron period. And their first level of political upheaval was the Brexit referendum. And I'm like, well, people in Salford, they've been living with political upheaval directly impacting them directly for the entirety of that period. But people who live in much more rich areas of this country, comparatively so, not necessarily rich types, but middle class types, they would never have any contact with that stuff, and they would never have understood the impact of the austerity policies, which were, as I said, it was, as far as I'm concerned, a democidal policy. If the reports are to be believed, 330,000 people are excess deaths under austerity. Do you know that's more people that were killed in Idi Amin's purges? That's the context of how much damage the Conservative government did in 2010 to 2015. But they never noticed it, and they never understood it. And that is why this idea that they want to return to normality is nonsense to me, because normal is miserable for working people. We need a far fairer economy and a new normal rather than the previous normal.
You've mentioned quite a few times in our discussion Brexit. Do you think that rejoining the European Union would improve our economy?
I think it would have some benefits. We have a very large trade deficit in this country, so not having tariff-free trade with the European Union would be a good thing. We have issues in Northern Ireland. I think that obviously there's still ECJ jurisdiction, but having access to the customs union would make easier transfer of goods across the border. We've had so much talk about Northern Ireland and the issues with the sanctity of the Good Friday Agreement. And there are plenty of economic benefits considering how much we've gutted manufacturing. We don't export at all. We do import lots. That's why we were massive. That's why we were over-affected by the war in Ukraine with energy prices and food prices, because of how much these imports were affected by things like tariffs or things like how appallingly our energy generation setup is in this country. But despite all of that, it's no panacea. It's no panacea, and that's what I get frustrated with the hashtag FBP types on Twitter who've made rejoining the European Union their whole personality. And I get it. I get why they want to do it. But things were broken before we left the European Union, and whilst it may have positive effects on the economy overall, we need drastic changes otherwise, because the fact that we didn't get those benefits in the European Union in left behind northern towns is exactly why Brexit happened in the first place, because they were never getting their fair share of the gains that we had economically from being members.
So it sounds like there needs to be a big redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, not just from bourgeois to proletariat, but from south to north, and from assets to wages, right? One of the big problems in our economy is that during the George Osborne period again, they continued quantitative easing, right? They keep saying, we brought the economy under control. The debt to GDP ratio went up every single year the Conservatives were in power from 2010 to 2019. And so George Osborne never got the economy under control, if you go by that metric. I don't personally. I think the deficit's a completely illusory number. Stephanie Kelton has done really good work on the fact that deficits don't really matter in the long run. But those increased deficits were for extra quantitative easing, which went into financial markets for them to increase asset prices. So we had loads of growth, loads of GDP growth from increases of asset prices. Did that filter down? Did that trickle down to poor people in this country? No, of course it didn't. And in fact, what it's done is it's made assets, not just, like financial assets, financial instruments increase in value, but house prices is one of the big things. Housing crisis is a huge problem at the moment. And now working class people growing up nowadays, they will never own homes. They will never own homes.
I think, you mentioned sort of working class, and I can understand that, but I think even for like middle class, like someone such as myself, for example, I'm 23 years old. I've been content for the last year that I will never own my own home. It is very unlikely that I will ever own my own home. And that feels weird at the age of 23 that I'm there going like, oh, I won't be able to do that. Even though like I'm doing well for myself, but I'm still of the opinion and still in that mindset, I will never be able to buy my own home. So when I get people who bought their house for like 20 quid and a packet of Marlboro Reds be like, oh, you just got to save, and it's like, piss off. Like, honestly, like,
it's absolutely infuriating.
But I think
mindset, yeah.
Like the only way I will get on the property ladder is basically if I win the lottery or one of my parents dies.
Or Mr. Beast buys you
Or Mr. Beast buys me a home. Like, if you're watching this, Mr. Beast, like, I've always liked your content. I've never understood the hate towards you.
Big fan.
And I don't want either of my parents to die. So, that's literally like the only way I'm going to own my own home. And that is really shit. Because
it was deliberate policy.
Yeah.
It was deliberate policy, right? It was short-term policy to, after the post-financial crisis, keep interest rates as low as possible. I think it's one of the reasons why David Cameron won in 2015 was that people's mortgages didn't go up in value because there wasn't any need to dampen demand with higher interest rates because no one had any money because wages were depressed through supply-side labour market reform. So in short terms, policies that were done by the government to weaken the bargaining power of workers in that period to try and ensure that there was never so much demand that prices would rise to meet that demand. And because interest rates stayed low, house prices skyrocketed for all of that period. Mortgage rates were low. People could get on the housing ladder. They were angling for the aspirational class. But now obviously interest rates have risen because we have a shock on import prices, which has massively spiked inflation. the difference for what people are paying on their mortgages for just a very small increase in interest rates is huge, far more than what the boomer types would talk about when we had 15% interest rates for a very, very short period in the 1980s. The fact that house prices were so much lower, the increase from 0.25% rates to 5.5% rates like we have now is a bigger financial increase on the amount you pay on your mortgage than it was for them when rates went from 5 to 15%, for example, even though, again, it was only for a short period of time. And this deliberate kind of fattening of house prices for the conservative voter base, again, it's really screwed over our generation from getting on the property ladder.
And Liz Truss, if you're watching or listening this is why whenever anyone sees you, they go, fuck off, you dickhead. NJ, before you go, thank you so much for this discussion because I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything that you would like to promote or mention?
I mean, if you want to follow me on all of my platforms, I use the same handle for everything. It's @NoJusticeMTG. That's a Magic the Gathering reference, by the way, before you think it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's on YouTube and Twitch, which is where I live stream 5 days a week, usually, if I have the time. Same on TikTok, where I upload clips from my streams. And then also on the other ones like Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. Mostly Twitter, or X, as it's now to be known.
Well, probably won't be known much longer because we might have to start paying to use it.
Oh, true.
Yeah, you know, I mean, if I speak about Elon Musk, I'm going to be in big trouble. And to all of you who are listening and watching, thank you so much. We've had a massive increase in listenership and following over the last couple of weeks. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And we will see you for the next episode. Thank you.